Welcome to Highland Presbyterian Church and our Senior Life Institute program entitled Birds on the Brink. The Senior Life Institute is a program providing members of our congregation and the community at large with a new dimension of lifelong learning. Today we are excited to introduce Linda Ferich in a presentation entitled Community Wildlife Habitat.
Hello, I'm Linda Ferich. Thank you so much for inviting me for this event, to present at this event for the Senior Life Institute. And now I'm going to show you my presentation on community wildlife habitat. I am the coordinator for the Lancaster Conservancy Community Wildlife Habitat. So I love this cartoon. It tells a little bit about me, that I grew up on a farm, and this was the landscaping practices on the farm at that time. It was very chemical oriented. So I'm actually a retired nurse, and after I retired from nursing, I became a Pennsylvania master naturalist. And I'm really a need-seen person. Maybe you have heard of the term, a calling is a need seen. So the first need that I saw when I was in the Master Naturalist program was the need for stream testing in the southern end of Lancaster County. So I started a stream testing chapter in the southern end of the county, which is a partnership between Lancaster Conservancy and the Lancaster County Conservation District. And then about 3 years ago, I saw a calling or a need seen for the fact that birds are in major decline, our pollinators are in decline, and what are we going to do about all this lawn and invasive species that are everywhere in the landscape? And that was pretty much the beginning of the Community Wildlife Habitat Program. So National Wildlife Federation, most of you will be familiar with that organization, started a program called Garden for Wildlife some time ago, but National Wildlife Federation has been around since 1936. So knowing their program that they had, I did a little bit more investigation and found out that they also had a program called Community Wildlife Habitat, which builds on the Backyard Habitat program. So Community Wildlife Habitat provides habitat for wildlife throughout the community. It's where people live, work, learn, play, and worship. So it's actually a combination of all the backyard habitats in an area. And it can be on private property or church properties, places of worship, schoolyard habitat, businesses, all these many different entities. So we decided that our community wildlife habitat would be the entire county of Lancaster, which is pretty exciting. Instead of just a municipality or just a development, or just a homeowners association, we decided it would be the entire county. So in order to accomplish that, I partnered with Lancaster Conservancy, and many of you are familiar with them as well. They have now preserved over, or close to 7,000 acres of land, mostly in the river hills of Lancaster and York County. Building upon that, here are two books that I would recommend by Dr. Talamy, so you can learn a little bit more about the importance of habitat. These are two great books to read. The first one that he wrote in this two-step series is Bringing Nature Home, and the second one was Nature's Best Hope. Dr. Talamy lives in Chester County. He is an entomologist at University of Delaware and has done quite a bit of public speaking in our area on the importance of habitat. and what a difference it can make for our wildlife. So this is from his website. He very clearly states the problem, which you can see there. We have great loss of habitat, which has caused decline in important ecosystems, which affect humans also, and along with that, great decline in our wildlife. And at this point, we see a big decline in the pollinators and the bird population. But the good news is there's a solution. Over 85% of the US is privately owned. So if all of the privately owned property owners would install habitat on their properties, all of these combined could make a difference, and we would see a great increase in corridors for our wildlife. So this is a food pyramid. You've probably seen similar things like this. It's all about the food web. At the very bottom of that pyramid is plants. And then building from those plants, moving on up the pyramid, are insects and mammals, and that's where the birds come in. And it goes the whole way to the top, which is us. So a lot of us don't know this, but hummingbirds don't rely on the nectar that we put out for them so much as insects. 60% of their diet is insects, and the insects need the plants. So this is sort of some negative statistics I'm putting out there now so that you do know that we have a definite problem. The monarchs have been in the news quite a bit. There was a little bit of an improvement in 2018 to 2019, but they still need our help. The monarch is a classic example of an insect that relies on one species of plant life, and that's the milkweed. The bumblebee, which most of us have grown up seeing lots of bumblebees around us, is also in major decline and has been considered for the Endangered Species Act. And different things have affected the bumblebees. Habitat loss is the main thing. Our type of farming that we do now, monoculture farming with GMO farms, we have lost biodiverse farming skills, application of pesticides and herbicides, disease, and also climate change. 30% of our North American birds are in major decline, and 1 in 8 are threatened with extinction. A lot of us grew up hearing bob whites. They are no longer around in Lancaster County, and I understood that they are near extinction now. More than 4,000 wild bees species and countless species of butterflies, flies, wasps, moths, beetles, birds, and bats, and other animals are pollinators. Pollinators are essential to life because 35% of our food depends on pollinators. Pollinator crops include vegetables, fruits, seeds, nuts, and oils. If you like chocolate and coffee, you have to like pollinators because those crops rely on pollination. Another fact that is not written on here is that 90% of our flowers depend on pollination. So this is what the section of the grocery store looks like presently, where the yogurt is, a lot of the dairy products. This is what it's like now. And this is information from Xerces Society, and I think they used Wegmans as an example, or it could have been Whole Foods. But this is what that dairy case would look like if we don't have pollinators. So a lot of the missing food in there is food that would include crops like fruit. So there is hope, and we need to have some good goals for conservation to help the birds and the insects. And this is also written by Dr. Talamy. He says, to succeed, we need to redesign residential landscapes to support diverse pollinator populations and complex food webs, store carbon, and also manage our watersheds. How do we do that? We plant native plants. So as an example, our Lepidoptera, which are butterfly and moth caterpillars, rely on native plants. They actually eat the leaves of plants, and they're supported by the plants. So looking at this list, the #1 woody plant are oaks. So if you have oak tree on your property, it's wonderful because they support 534 different species of Lepidoptera. And then black cherries are next. Willows are third. Now this would be our native willows, not Asian willows like weeping willows, and birch trees. And then on the perennial side there's goldenrods and asters, sunflowers, and Joe Pye weed. So in the fall, I really encourage people to plant a lot of goldenrod and asters. They're beautiful together. They provide that much food to that many Lepidoptera, and it's also a great source of nectar for our migrating monarchs as they go through Lancaster County. So black cherries, as an example, provide food to 456 species of moth caterpillars and butterflies, and also food to 33 species of birds. Violets, I love them. I use them as the ground cover in all my gardens. Unfortunately, a lot of lawn care companies promote them as weeds. So get them out of your lawns and put them in the gardens because they provide food to the fritillary butterfly, which, as you can see there, is a beautiful butterfly. And it's very pretty in the spring. In my gardens, using violets, it really crowds out other weeds from coming in. And I don't have to mulch anymore. I haven't mulched for about 7 years now. So I'm going to review now what the elements of a habitat are. They are food, cover, water, places to raise young, and then we're going to keep some sustainable gardening practices in mind to help the wildlife. So food can be in the form of seeds, fruit, and nuts. There's different examples there. Hazelnuts are great. And then purple coneflowers, actually you leave them standing in the winter so that the goldfinches and other birds can eat the seeds all winter long. Those are pine siskins there on the evergreen tree hanging upside down. They use the seed inside the cones. And viburnums, there's a lot of wonderful native viburnums and also dogwood shrubs that provide great berries for the birds. And a lot of these plants also provide flowers for the pollinators in late spring, early summer. So 97% of our birds require bugs. My daughter, who's a forester, said I shouldn't use the word bugs, but that's what's on this screen, as food to raise their young. So when we are exterminating areas that we're killing insects, sometimes we're killing the healthy or the beneficial insects that our birds need to eat. And I really didn't know for a long time that baby birds need caterpillars. Their throats were designed by the Creator to be able to swallow caterpillars. They can't swallow seeds and nuts and those types of foods. So that's why having food that caterpillars can eat is essential. So here's some examples of food for the caterpillars. There is a great picture of a mother robin feeding her babies a nice big green juicy caterpillar. I'm not sure what it is. One of my weaknesses is knowing all the caterpillars. Dr. Talamy in that first book, Bringing Nature Home, has a great resource of photos of caterpillars and the host plant that those caterpillars need. So oak, as we said, provides over 500 food for 500 different Lepidoptera. There's a great photo of a monarch caterpillar on butterfly weed, which is a type of milkweed in the right upper corner. Down there in the bottom center is a violet leaf, and that's a fritillary caterpillar, which I saw a lot of the past couple weeks in my gardens. And there on the right is a pipevine swallowtail caterpillar that relies on Dutchman's pipevine. So you need cover also, and here's just different examples of cover for birds and insects. Food and shelter is essential in the winter. A lot of times we don't think about that. We tend to put feeders out, but they need much more than that. They need a nice shrubby layer in your landscape to have shelter. Having a wood pile or a waste pile in an area on a property is great for habitat. Leave the plant life stand all winter because a lot of things use those plants. We have a tendency to chop everything down in the fall, but to help wildlife, we really should not be doing that. Water is essential. That's controlled water, not storm water, but so there's just different examples of how we can provide water to our wildlife. One thing I do for the pollinators is just take the top of a bird bath or a pot tray, put some rocks in it, put a little bit of water in it, and then just put it on the ground in one of my gardens, and butterflies and other insects can get water that way. Raising young. These are just different ways that our wildlife raise young in our environment. So a birdhouse is obvious. We need native plants, like down there in that lower right-hand corner for the monarch and other caterpillars. So native plants are an essential part of the young of the butterfly and moths. And there's just different ideas there. Leaving up there in the left upper corner is a picture of a pileated woodpecker family. And so you actually can leave part of a dead tree snag up for the woodpeckers to make a home, or other smaller birds also use smaller holes in the dead snag trees. So native plants are an essential part of habitat. So just going through a few of them, we actually have 2,100 different species of native plants, and then there's over 1,300 species of non-native plants. But here are some of the native plants. Dogwood provides great berries for the birds. We just had a whole flock of robins go through our property eating all the berries on our flowering dogwood trees. Hollies, a similar scenario. You'll see entire flocks of birds going through an area eating all the berries on the holly. Blue lobelia is great nectar and pollen for insects. I'm not sure if the birds then might eat some of those seeds. There's a lot of native plants that are used for nectar and pollen by our insects, and then if you leave them stand, the birds will eat those seeds in the fall. Blueberries, of course, and then we already talked about the Dutchman's pipe, the flowers providing great nectar, and then the leaves are providing food for the caterpillars. So this is a photo of mountain mint in my yard. Through some trial studies done at Mount Cuba and by master gardeners, they discovered that mountain mint is the #1 pollinator plant. My husband and I just love to go outside when it's in bloom and count all the different types of pollinators. We've counted as many as 40 at one time. And it attracts this great blue wasp, which I really believe in integrated pest management to control things like Japanese beetles, because if you plant some mountain mint on your property, it will attract this wasp. And by the way, most wasps do not sting people, and when they're getting their food, unless you're messing with them, they're not interested in stinging you. But anyway, this wasp lays its egg in the same hole that the Japanese beetle larva is in, and then the wasp will eat the Japanese beetle larva. So we've seen great decline of Japanese beetles just on our property alone by planting mountain mint. So people always wonder, where can I get native plants? And at the end here, I'll talk a little bit more about what you can do for your property if you live in an apartment and you don't actually own property. But if you go to this website, National Wildlife Federation, you can put in your zip code, and a list of native plants that do well in your area will come up. Also, I am more than willing to visit people. I'll go into that a little bit later. And I have lists of plants to hand out to people and give you ideas also of what you can do in your environment. It doesn't matter if you live in a large house or a small apartment, everyone can do something. So this is a great site. There's also other good sites out there, like Audubon has good sources, and also Penn State University has great lists of native plants that do well in our area. So we're going to go into some sustainable practices now. These are things that we can all do to help the wildlife. This is a big one, leaving the leaves. So this time of year in particular, you'll see large piles of leaves everywhere, and then there's crews coming through that chop up the leaves and then haul them out to the landfill. So what we do on our property and what I recommend is, and I know it's a little hard for institutions to always follow this, but if you have a wild area on the property, gently blow the leaves to that area so that the leaves can stay. If you have a property like I do, then you can put all the leaves, and actually some of our neighbors now are bringing their leaves to our yard and putting them in the gardens. One of the reasons we don't see hummingbird moths anymore is because they overwinter in the leaves. There's a lot of insects in different phases of their life will overwinter. Sometimes it's cocoons, sometimes it's they go into a dormant phase and they stay in the leaves all winter. A lot of insects do that. And wild bees is essential. So honeybees are great. I love honey, but they are not one of our native bees. And there's been some research that shows that they can outcompete our native bees. And our native bees are essential for pollination. So to help our native bees, as I touched on earlier, it's important to leave the plant stalks in your gardens. Don't clean up so quick in the fall, because some of our native bees will actually use the stalks for their eggs. So this site that is really good is written by Heather Holm, H-O-L-M. She has written some great books, and she gives some good tips on how to help our native bees. There's her name there, Heather Holm. I have a couple of her books, but she talks about the cavity nesting bees and how we can help them. So I know which one I would rather have on my property. You can look at this photo and see what you think. So many of us are used to green lawn that is mowed very short, but to help our wildlife, we need more wild areas. And there's different things that institutions can do also, like putting in a pollinator garden, or planting swales, or just adding more trees to the landscape. So I just love that photo and the comparison between the two. So I'm going to talk about invasive species a little bit. We've had a big influx of plants from other countries that started when the Europeans came over. A lot of botanists that are well known actually brought plants from other countries. When we go out and do site assessments, we actually look at the plants that are on properties. So we refer to a good plant as a native plant because they're really helping in the food web from that very base, helping the insects and then the birds. Then there are neutral plants. Neutral plants are plants that are not native but not invasive. They haven't at this point ended up in forests or spread quickly into other areas. Things like lilacs, that type of thing, are neutral. So they're exotic, they're not native, but they're not harming the environment greatly. But if you look at your landscape and you have a lot of neutral plants, then you need to start bringing more native plants in. And then the third category of plants are the invasive. So we come right out and call those bad because they're really destroying a lot of our ecosystems. Here's some examples of some invasive plants, like burning bush. Right now we see a lot of those with their bright red leaves. A few of us are really trying to help places of worship and other institutions at removing burning bush. And another one is Japanese barberry. Those two are some of the worst. The shrubs that make berries are, like I said, some of the worst because the birds eat those berries, which are not that good for them. They don't have high fat content, and then they spread them out into forested areas. So a lot of us in conservation notice these invasive species when we're hiking in the woods and doing other conservation work, even along stream sites. So I always put those in the worst category if the birds can carry them out into the forest. Plus, they are not that good for our wildlife. Then there's English ivy, bamboo, periwinkle, or it has a couple other names, vinca, vine, are the common names. These are all common names for these plants. Butterfly bush, there was a big study done by Penn State that shows that butterfly bush's nutrition is really poor for the pollinators. It's not what they have evolved with needing, and also they spread a lot of places. Bradford pears, the common daylily, and Japanese spirea. So you might be aware of a lot of these, but these are plants that are in a lot of our landscape in Lancaster County, and we're just trying to encourage more developers and landscapers to move away from using these plants. So stormwater control is an essential sustainable practice. And right there on the left, that's an example of a rain garden. So the water's coming down the downspout and then going into that depressed area that collects the water so that it doesn't keep going. You have great swales here that are controlling the stormwater. So down there in the right lower corner is not a good example of sprinkling a lawn. You know, we shouldn't be sprinkling macadam streets. And other options for stormwater control are rain barrels, permeable pavers. That on the lower right-hand corner is a buffer zone along a stream, and there's great effort in our county to increase buffers along streams to capture stormwater and to control the runoff and help with the nitrate and phosphate levels that are affecting the bay. So I'm very involved with planting lots of buffers in the county, along with some of our conservation friends like the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, Donegal Trout Unlimited, and Chesapeake Bay Foundation. So I really like this, the importance of reducing lawn. You have a great opportunity to do that here. And as an example, lawn is sort of like green cement. Stormwater would just go flying across it. At least you have the swales here. But as an example, on that chart, you can see how regular lawn has very superficial roots. And there's examples of our native grasses. Look how the difference is in that root system. So with those longer roots, it really captures a lot of water that's running through property. This is just a couple photos of some rain gardens that were done, and they're very diverse. It's funny, our house is out in Lancaster, and our house is a little lower than other properties in the development. So we had, every time it rained, we had a lot of water flowing through our property. So the developer's answer was to put straw bales all through our yard. And I thought, that's not going to work for long. So I made this depressed garden in the back end of our property, and started collecting the stormwater that was flying through. And then a few years later, they started calling them rain gardens. And in a rain garden, you can plant plants that don't mind really wet roots for a couple days, but can also tolerate drought. So there's a lot of great plants that can do that, like Joe Pye weed, lots of shrubs. So I like this poster and made it part of this presentation. We can get so overwhelmed by things that are happening in the world, from politics to environmental issues, and it's endless what can affect us in a negative way. But I feel like this is something that we all can do together to make a difference. And the future of conservation is really our yards, because as Dr. Talamy says, 85% of the properties in the US are owned by private landowners, so we can all together make a difference. That's a picture of my house. It's a little different now. We now have a front porch on for those who are coming into our house in the rain. We finally got around to that. There where that rock is, we've extended that little spot of lawn, and it's even smaller lawn in our front yard now. And I do know that when families have small children, it's important to have an area where the children can play. The nice thing about our development is that we're right across from the LS school complex, so if we have any children visit, they can just run on over to the school and play. But every year we just keep decreasing our lawn more and more. I would say right now our yard is about 99% native. I had a few non-native plants, nothing invasive, but things I've been getting rid of over the years, and just keep adding more native plants for the wildlife. When we first moved into our development 27 years ago, I can honestly say that we never noticed any birds there. Now we have tons of birds in our small yard. We only have 1/3 of an acre, but we get a lot of birds stopping by eating the fruit on the shrubs and trees, and lots of pollinators come to our yard. So here's the objectives of our group. Number one, educational outreach. So we do meet with property owners of all types, like I was saying earlier, places of worship, schools, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, about the schools. Businesses, I try to meet with even industrial parks. Sometimes they want to talk to me, sometimes they don't. I'm okay with that. I figure over time, with the tipping point, more and more people will get on board with this. We also train habitat stewards, which is a National Wildlife Federation program, and we've incorporated that with the Community Wildlife Habitat Program. At present, we have 40 volunteers who go out and help us do things like put in gardens at churches. And another thing, as an example, on Monday we're taking out, it's either 4 or 6 massive burning bushes at a synagogue. They are the size of small trees, so we're really excited to get those out of there. We had no idea, and neither did some of the synagogue members know that there are actually very long, beautiful stained glass windows behind those burning bushes. So that's the first thing. We protect and promote native plant species. That's very important to us. We're working on that invasive species removal. Certify our county as a National Wildlife Community Habitat. I just found out yesterday that our county is now certified wildlife habitat. We are the first county in the state of Pennsylvania, so that's very exciting. And you'll be seeing a press release on that from Lancaster Conservancy. So what I really enjoy doing is the property assessments, and I touched on this earlier. So we go to properties, and sometimes another habitat steward will go along to learn the plants. And I'm not a botanist, I make that very clear. I'm a retired nurse, but I'm very interested in plants and trying my best to learn them. It's a little hard when there's 1,300 species of exotic plants. But we walk around the property, talk about the plants that are there, whether they're good, neutral, or bad, like I touched on. And then we have a whole packet of resource material we provide to the property owner to help them learn how to develop habitat on their property. Another thing I love to do is collaborate with other organizations like the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, especially if the property owner has a stream on their property, or acres and acres of lawn that can be converted to either a forest or a pollinator meadow. That's a particular grant that DCNR and the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay has available right now, which is pretty amazing. So this is one garden we put in at history.org. This is along President Avenue and Marietta Pike. They are actually using it for education now to people who come to History Museum. There's 13 different species of native plants there. And it was a wonderful collaboration between master naturalists, master gardeners, the Muhlenberg Botanical Society, which I'm a member of, and habitat stewards, and people from the community. So we had a lot of volunteers who put in those 3 big gardens there along President Avenue. If you ever have a chance, please go see it. It's beautiful in the summer, actually spring, summer, or fall. And when we designed that, we made sure that there are things blooming all 3 seasons. So this is at Moravian Manor. I try to work with retirement communities. They have this large courtyard, which is close to the skilled care area and their cafeteria. So this is sort of what it looked like. They have this person who lives at Moravian Manor who is a wonderful artist and has done some great designs. So you can see some of his artwork there in the garden. Does great sculptures. So this was when we first planted it. There was really a lot of bad plants in there. And this is an example of what's happening there now. I have been able to virtually see a little bit of the garden, but it's a little hard for me right now because I can't get in there. But we know that the maintenance landscaping crew there at Moravian Manor is taking good care of that. And we designed it so that they no longer have to haul mulch through the cafeteria into that courtyard. We try to do things with different school groups. This is just an example of a small pollinator garden put in with a friend up in the Warwick Township area. They have a watershed day for all the, I believe, fourth graders in Warwick, and they go through different stations. So one station was for them to learn about our pollinators and birds and the plants that they rely on, and then the children got to plant some plants. That is in a park called I think it's Gene Saylor Park, or Dean Saylor. I always mess up the first name. I think it's Dean Saylor. This is just an example of two pollinator gardens we put in at the Lancaster Cemetery on the corner of Lemon and Lime. My friend was on the board there, and it's pretty unique because it's family plots that are surrounded by small cement walls, so we were able to put the gardens in easily. So in that garden in particular, there's a lot of mountain mint and black-eyed Susans. We also put in the purple coneflower, echinacea, for the birds to eat the seeds. Schoolyard Habitat is a program with National Wildlife. And let me just back up and say that 2 years ago, a year after we started this whole program, we formed two committees in our group. One was Schoolyard Habitat, and the other one was Sacred Grounds. So Schoolyard Habitat was chaired by a young woman, Elise Jurgen, who's a teacher, and she actually developed that committee to the point where it's now a separate whole program, but also very much collaborates with us in that program. So she is at this time developing habitat in Lancaster City schools with the hope of eventually spreading that to throughout the county. So it's pretty exciting. I think she's done 3 pollinator gardens now, and she also goes into the classroom and does environmental education with the students. And then the other one is Sacred Grounds. This is still a committee. So we have gone out to probably 8 different places of worship and talked to them about Sacred Grounds. We actually can do a workshop with them and their church members. And sometimes they want to develop habitat. So there's a Lutheran church up in Lidditz that just put in 1 acre of meadow and 2 acres of forest behind their church. And then there's a church in Akron that's doing something similar. That's Akron Mennonite. Grace Lutheran just installed lots of pollinator gardens on their church property. So this is just really exciting, and we're hoping that this keeps spreading throughout the county because a lot of churches have lots and lots of lawn to mow, and it would be great to reduce the amount of lawn mowing that is happening in the county. And to end here, here's some of our partners, lots of partners that we try to work with to get this conservation accomplished throughout the county. And they're really wonderful people to work with. So I just want to thank you again for allowing me to speak today. And one thing I did want to tell you is that I have this sheet that I developed. It's 2-sided, and I can pass this on to Donna by email, Donna Benson at the Senior Life Institute. It's actually a sheet designed so that you know what you can plant in a container on your patio or your terrace if you have an outside area. So it's different size pots. There's a small, medium, and large size. It tells you what size pot you need, and also what plant that you can plant and what the benefit of the plant is, whether it's providing berries for the birds or it's helping the pollinators. There's even one here that helps the hummingbirds. And along with that, then, it shows you the importance of overwintering your plants so that they continue to thrive. And I guess if you have any questions then also, or you would like to meet with me, you can contact Donna and then she will contact me. Thank you so much.